Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend, where we go behind the scenes and talk to the creators of independent entertainment. I'm Jason Godbey, and with me in the Rabbit Hole studio today, if you've been following the show, you know my guest. You love him. He's been on Indie Film News. He is the master of all things sound and music for Behind the Rabbit Productions, as well as the man behind Soundhouse Audio. Welcome back, my good friend, Mr. Chris Gillard. Welcome back, man.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you, buddy. It's been a minute since we did this.
It's been a while.
We were doing the Indie Film News thing for a bit, which I appreciate you produced for us. That was an audio exclusive if you guys want to go back and listen to those episodes.
Yes, please do.
But today we're talking about some serious business. We're getting into the sound, the studio sound, the whole gear setup that you've got for that. And this will kind of tell you guys out there how to build your own sound kit at home, your own professional studio setup, and hopefully probably on something of a budget. Now, this is stuff that you've been building over a lot of time,
over years, many years.
Yeah. So you don't have to get all this stuff at once.
Right.
All right. So let's break it down. I think probably the best way to do it is let's go hardware and then software.
Yeah. That makes sense.
All right. So for the hardware, let's talk about kind of what you record into. You have a Mac computer, but you also have an interface that you use. Tell us about that.
Right now, I'm using the Behringer FCA 16 interface. It's 8 channels in, so I can record up to like 8 mics or 8 audio sources. It's a rack mount unit that I have sitting like in my desk. And it's I believe it's, gosh, I've had mine for a couple of years now, and I believe it was like $425 when I bought it.
Okay.
So, reasonably priced. Good sound, easy to hook up to just about anything.
So for a layperson like me who doesn't know this stuff like you know this stuff, what does the Behringer unit do? That's where you have all of your sliders and stuff, right?
No, that is the interface. Basically, what you're recording into, you've got to have something in order to get the sound from the microphone into the computer, basically.
Okay.
All right.
This is converting your practical sound into digital sound.
Correct.
Okay, and that enables you to plug in your different instruments, your different microphones, your MIDI, all that stuff,
and record into the software.
And record into the software,
right,
which we'll get into in a minute.
Right.
Okay, so that's just the board. That's your interface board.
Right.
And then to manipulate the sound once it goes through the interface board, what are you using for that?
I have another Behringer piece of equipment. It's called the Behringer X Touch, which is it's a MIDI mixer controller. Basically, it really doesn't work as. It's not a standalone mixer. Like it's a physical controller for your recording software. That
interfaces with your Cubase, your Pro Tools,
your
all that.
Logic. Yeah.
Okay, but it just gives you like physical sliders.
Physical faders, physical buttons you can press instead of having to do everything with the mouse. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not sitting there working on just digital faders.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have those two pieces. Now, what made you go with Behringer as opposed to Sennheiser or one of the other, many brands out there? What was about that piece of gear and what's the name of the gear again?
It's the X Touch.
The X Touch.
Yeah. Behringer's line has become very, very, like their product offering has increased a lot, and just the features in the products they're coming out with now are for the price, like at the price point they're at, like you kind of can't beat them. For the X Touch is like $700, and it's like 8 motorized faders. You got all your transport controls, jog wheel, so you can scroll through your timeline without having to again click through it with the mouse, and you can connect it to your computer. You can connect that X Touch can connect to Behringer's mixer line, like their wireless mixers. You can connect to that and control that with it as well.
So you can mix, in theory, you could mix like live sound on the set with
absolutely.
it?
Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so you could, you can use it.
It's a multi-purpose type thing.
Exactly. You can use it in the studio. You can use
Very
it
cool.
on set. You can use it in a theater. You can use it anywhere.
So for you, so now that those are your the physical stuff, and that's going into your iMac,
Right.
And
I also have a keyboard.
and then you have like
A piano keyboard.
Keyboard.
Right.
Is that all MIDI interface that you're using?
That's
Okay.
all. That's just a MIDI controller. Again, that's another thing that doesn't really do anything unless it's connected to a computer. Like I can't just plug it into an amp and
Right.
it only controls whatever sound you have loaded into your software.
And what's the make and everything of that piece?
That is an M Audio key station. I have the 88 key version. It's nice. It's 88 full size keys, semi weighted. For the price, you can't beat it. I will say the keys are a little noisy on it, like when you're actually just
A little clicky.
Yeah, a little
Okay.
clicky. But other than that, have had it for like 3-4 years. That's my only complaint.
Do you just use that to compose music, or do you plug sound effects and stuff in there too?
Sometimes I use it to trigger sound effects, but mostly it's I'm playing recording piano parts, recording string parts, recording horn parts, drum parts even. Like I used to have a little drum pad unit for recording drums, but by then I had been doing it on a piano keyboard for so long that I'm just used to the piano keyboard, and so I even do my drums like on the piano keyboard.
And so, all in all, now you're able to use this stuff use it for sound design, you use it for Foley, you do ADR, and all the music stuff that you do.
Correct.
Now, for the mixing table, is that mainly just for music, or are you mixing entire movies with that?
Oh, entire movies. Yeah.
Okay,
Like
cool.
everything I do, I have the X Touch, which has 8 faders, and then I also have an extender, which is basically just an add-on unit that gives you another 8 faders for a total of 16. So I've got 16 faders, and you can scroll through them. So like however many tracks you have in your project, if you've got 32 tracks, you can control all 32 of them. You just have to scroll through.
Very cool.
The current setup that I assembled with versatility in mind.
Right, because you want to be able to do all of this stuff.
Exactly.
Now, the stuff that you've got, it's moderately priced, but it's not cheap. Are there other units, like, first of all, do you need this stuff if you're going to mix, or do you need the physical faders, or would you recommend if somebody starting out just kind of using their software faders and then going into like getting that once they've kind of built up a business kind of thing?
You don't need this stuff. It just makes the work so much easier, Yes, in terms of like the controls, in terms of like the transport controls, the stop, start, like all the editing and selecting controls you can do with the X Touch, you can very easily do those if you know the computer keyboard shortcuts for the software you're using. No question about that. But my thing is, no matter how well you know the shortcuts, you can still only move one fader at a time with a mouse.
Right.
You can't grab like 10 of them, like one with each finger, and sort of adjust them all like relative to each other, which is, sometimes you need to do that.
It's more like being in a real recording studio.
Right.
And is that, in terms of your interfacing with the computer, is that the extent of your hardware, or do you have more stuff on top of that you use?
In terms of the studio setup, that's really the heart of it.
For the most part, when you're recording stuff there, of course you use instruments and things like that, and you can use your Behringer interface to plug in guitars and microphones and so forth. Yeah. So if somebody's looking to do more film stuff, like say you need to do an ADR session or something like that, what kind of gear do you have, like the physical gear, what kind of gear do you have for that sort of setup?
Basically everything I have. All you really need for stuff like that is you just have to, you have to have an interface that allows you to connect your microphones to the computer, and then you need, you don't even need a huge selection of microphones, but you probably, there's a few kind of sort of not must-haves, but really needs.
Okay, let's
in terms of mics.
Let's get into mics because right now I'm talking on this condenser mic, and you're talking on the good old reliable SM58.
Yeah.
So when you record, say audio overdub audio, say you're doing voiceover or ADR for a film, do you use a mic like mine or a mic like yours?
Like yours.
Like
condenser,
this?
Yeah.
Okay,
so condenser mic.
And why is it important to have a condenser for that type of work?
To me, it's hard to describe. It's hard to put the difference in sound quality between like a large diaphragm condenser mic and say a dynamic mic like the SM58. It's, I don't know. To me, condenser mics, it's just it feels like it's a more complete sound in terms of like the stereo feel.
Is it better for voices, would you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. To me, condenser mics almost always add like a dimension of like warmth to a voice that, you know, whether it's male, female, that you don't really get as much with a dynamic mic, I think.
As opposed to like if you were recording music or something like that. Like if you were miking a guitar or something like that. There's all different types of mics for that.
If I were miking a guitar or something like an instrument, I would probably use like a smaller diaphragm condenser mic. But, you know, at the end of the day, as I was taught, you know, by the engineer who I learned from, you know, basically was like, you use the mics you have. Ultimately.
Right.
That's
so if you got an
SM58, yeah, that's what you use.
Now you've also got some baffling and things like that you use.
Yeah.
How is that important? Because, you know, when you're doing ADR, the thing that always gets me about ADR in particular is it sounds like ADR.
Right.
A lot of the times. Like you'll see two people and they're driving in a car, and then you'll hear this voice that sounds like it comes from a totally different place kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've noticed it in a lot of like dialogue-heavy movies. You have two people in a park in Manhattan, and then they sound like they're in a room somewhere.
Yeah.
How important is it to have like a clean environment when you're setting up your home studio so that you don't get like, because you have to deaden the noise,
right?
But then you got to put noise back in when you're doing the ADR. So does the micage help for that, or is it more like the studio and the baffling and all that kind of stuff?
My goal always when I'm recording ADR is to just get the cleanest, driest signal I can get. What I'm starting to get into now, and I'm planning, you know, I'm driving across the country next week, so I'm actually going to take my my Zoom recorder and my laptop with me. I'm going to start doing like basically getting impulse responses, because there's a thing you can do now where you can, like, if I want to get the sound of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown, I can go there with my laptop and a microphone and just get a couple of recordings of me clapping in the space. And I can put that into my reverb plugin in Logic, and it can recreate that space with any piece of audio I put into it.
Wow.
So I want to start building a library of impulse responses. I have some, but I want to like start making my own.
So like if you're in a car and you want it to sound like a car, you can make that reverb sound like that?
I can just take it, sit in the laptop with the laptop in the car, clap a couple of times, feed that recording.
Oh my God, that's really cool, man.
Yeah.
You always told me about stuff that like just blows my head open when you like the sound stuff, because you know I don't deal with sound. You know, other than this show, this is the most sound that I record. So it's always good to have someone like you that knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And you know, sound is so important. Like it's so important to a film. And if you're trying to do this self, or if you're a sound mixer out, you know, like Chris also does stuff like on a budget as well. Like this is stuff that he's acquired over a long time. We're going to get into software in a minute, but in terms of any other physical stuff that people would need to know about setting up their own studio, can you give me like a rough outlook of like the space and stuff for it?
What you need is, you know, you need a computer, basically. You can find what the current best specs are for like an audio production computer, whether you want to go with a Mac or PC, pretty much anywhere online. You need some kind of audio interface. You know, one good thing about pretty much every model, if you're, you know, looking into like doing what I do and doing like production sound as well, pretty much every model of Zoom recorder can also work as an audio interface.
So in theory, you could use your F8 for that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pretty much every model, like my handheld, the F8.
Oh, no kidding. So even like a H4n or H5n can
like
do it.
You can use to connect to computer and like, you know, use that as your audio interface. So there's a lot of different devices. You don't have to buy a dedicated interface like mine. There's lots of different devices now that can double as an interface.
That's really cool, because you can get more bang for your buck that way.
Exactly.
So in theory, you could take say you're a sound recordist on set, and you want to start doing more mixing, you want to start doing more post sound. You could start out by just taking, if you have to do ADR, if you have to do some other kind of mixing, you can take your H5N or your F8 or your sound device or what, and plug that into your computer and just use that as the
interface.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
So, and then in terms of the space itself, I think that's probably the hardest part for most people.
Yeah, I mean the space. Yeah, that's usually in terms of space. The one of the things that you for an acoustically, at least an acoustically okay space, is you don't want a room that's equal dimensions.
You don't want a big square.
Right. You don't want a room that's 10 feet long by 10 feet wide by 10 feet tall.
Why don't you want that?
You get what's called standing waves, and it just causes like problems, like just because of like literally it's like the physics and the math of how sound works.
Just reverberating.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's best if you're again unequal dimensions, like maybe a room that's a little bit, maybe a couple feet longer than it is wide, or something like that. I find that my apartment has hardwood floors, and my studio is in my apartment, which means my studio has hardwood floors.
Right.
And I have found, at least I know that, even like big brick and mortar studios that I've worked in, they'll have some rooms that are hardwood, some rooms that are carpeted
For different sounds. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
And I like having the hardwood because if I want, to change the sound, I have half of the room, I have a rug, and then I can also, what I learned from the guy who taught me was like, the best thing about hardwoods is if you want to like deaden the sound a little bit, just throw some blankets on the floor.
Let's get into software now, because
Okay.
I think that's probably the thing that people want to know the most.
Sure.
Now, you have 3 different types of software.
I have 3 different, DAWs, 3.
What's a DAW?
Digital audio workstation. That's
Okay.
like the recording software. Like that's like Pro Tools, Cubase, Ableton, FL Studio.
So you have, and which ones do you use?
I own Pro Tools. I don't use it that often. I own Cubase. I use it a little more often than Pro Tools, but I work mostly in Logic Pro X.
Okay, and what was the thing, like, just get into a little contrast and compare here.
Mm-hmm.
Why, why Logic versus, why use Logic over Cubase or why use Logic over Pro Tools? Is it just because of your personal comfort level with it, or are there things in that you feel work better for the type of work that you do?
Yes.
All the
All of the above.
Okay.
It's I will say, and this was like probably the most common question I was asked when I was teaching audio was, what's the best DAW to buy or use?
Right. I figure that's probably what our listeners are going to want to know too.
Yeah, and my answer was always first, the thing to understand is we're at the point now where they all can kind of do all the same stuff. They all just kind of have a specialization. Like, Ableton is kind of more for people who are more like DJ type performers who like trigger live sounds.
Okay.
FL Studio tends to be used a lot more nowadays by like a lot of hip hop and R&B artists. Pro Tools is like, it's the industry standard. It is like, bottom line, it is the best quality digital multi-track recorder.
Still, even though...
But, the thing with Pro Tools is that that's all it is. It doesn't come with anything else. It doesn't come with any virtual instruments. It doesn't come with a lot of sound effects. It doesn't come with, you still, once you buy Pro Tools, you still have to like really have a studio. You still going to have to spend another several $1,000s on plugins. And Cubase comes with quite a lot of stuff. I really like Cubase. I don't use it as much only because by the time I got Cubase, I was already so familiar with Logic and I just can work so fast in it now. But I really do like Cubase. Logic I got because I went with and started with and I'm still with because it was even, when I started using Logic back in 2008, it was still like just about one of the cheapest softwares out there. It comes with so much like tons of sounds, drum sounds, and strings and everything. synthesizers, like all kinds of stuff that's like just comes with it. And
So this would be a good tool for the composers out there.
Logic's sort of niche within the DAW market is that it is what they call a studio in a box.
Right.
Like you can just buy this one piece of software. It has everything you need. You can go home and be making music tonight.
As opposed to the other ones.
As opposed to the other ones where, again, Cubase to an extent comes with a lot of stuff, but not as much as Logic does. Cubase is really good. I will say that Cubase has a particular set of features that make it really, really good for working with film and video.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's why a lot of film composers work in it.
Now, with all of these programs, say you're a composer and you want to, you're mixing or you're composing, all of these, I'm not sure about Pro Tools, but they have an interface where you can put the video in the program, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And you can kind of watch and play.
And it's saying you can, put it in Logic, just about all of them, it pops up at the top of the screen, and it's it's in line with your music, and you literally can watch the film and you can even open it up in a separate window. That's what I usually do, and have it on another monitor, and so that I'm
And this way, you can make sure that you're hitting points in the film. So if you know when that cue comes in, you can hit it right on that frame that you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is much better than kind of guessing at it.
Yeah, and it's
So if you were, say you're a composer or you're a novice composer, and say the biggest heavy duty DAW you've been using is like GarageBand or something comparable to Garage, maybe even like Audition. What would you feel like is the best upgrade for, like, if you had, in terms of user friendliness, in terms of familiarity? I mean, my guess would be that if you're a GarageBand user, going to something like Logic,
yeah,
because like Logic's like
the big brother of
GarageBand. it's like GarageBand on steroids. I've used GarageBand somewhat. I don't know, and I think I barely scratched the surface of it, because that program now is pretty robust.
I was gonna say, like, they've added honestly a lot of features that have been in Logic for years have now been ported over to GarageBand. Which I wasn't even aware of until like fairly recently. Like I just opened up GarageBand. I was like, whoa, you can do all of this stuff in here now too.
Yeah, they've got like virtual drummers in there.
Yeah, like that was a feature that came from Logic. Like that's been in Logic for years now, and you have it in GarageBand now.
Let's talk tips. Like, so that's your software. You can use all three kind of depending on what the demand of the project is.
Right.
I imagine that different pieces for different projects, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you're working with a production company, like, no, we only use Pro Tools, we only use Cubase, you can work in those interfaces.
Right.
But you don't need all three.
No, you don't need all three. The last piece of or I guess the piece of the software puzzle is making sure you have like a good library of A, sound effects, and B, virtual instrument software, because that's what can, especially if you're starting out with indie stuff where you're not going to go into a studio and like re-record with an orchestra and like your MIDI tracks are going to go in the film.
Or the London Philharmonic, they're busy that weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or just if you want to record demos of stuff.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, yeah, your demos would be, that's what they would be, but, on a big budget film, you'd take those demos, print out sheet music, then go in the studio and re-record it with an actual orchestra.
But now, like, from what I've heard, the stuff that we've done and the other stuff that you kind of don't need it, depending on where your film's going to go.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's like, if you're on an indie budget, then, and you don't have the money to hire an orchestra, somebody who really knows what they're doing can really give you something good with just MIDI. But again, if you have the budget and it's still done with a live orchestra, and
it'll do all your orchestrations and everything right in there for you. So do you have any other tips for people who are looking to get into this or looking to build their own home studio?
Just start with a computer, an interface, a microphone, and if you play keyboards, get you a little MIDI keyboard that can connect your computer. It doesn't need to be a full-sized, just something you can afford and that can connect and, be read by your software. And just start playing around with it. That's all this all started back in 2008. I walked into the Apple store and bought a copy of Logic Express and went home that night and recorded a song, and that's where it began for me.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
All right, man. So we're going to wrap up, but thanks so much for coming. I always appreciate you coming down and talking sound stuff because it's stuff that I don't know anything about. And I'm sure, if you're a budding sound person or if you're looking to compose, this is all great information from a practical standpoint. This is somebody who actually uses this stuff all the time. All right. So I'm going to wrap up, but thanks so much for coming, and thank you all for taking this trip down the rabbit hole. For more episodes of this show, you can always find them on our website, norestoftheweekendpodcast.com. You can also subscribe to us on all the major podcast channels. And now we're on Patreon if you want to subscribe there. So it's patreon.com/norestoftheweekend. There's a lot of cool stuff up there that you can check out. But once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Chris Gillard. Thanks for coming, buddy. We'll do some more shows like this when we have more stuff to talk about. For Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.